Hi there, I'm Amber Ellis, and I was a park ranger for 8 years. I won't specify where because I don't want to get in trouble. One of the people I worked with told me to read the other park ranger stories on here, so I thought I'd give it a shot, and hell, it's good to see someone being honest. It inspired me to share some of my own stories. People need to know what happens in the woods. I quit my job a couple of years ago. I couldn't deal with bottling up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel like I'm drowning in the memories of it all, so I'm going to share them. I don't know if I'll be able to share everything. It might be too hard, but I'll give it a go. I hope this raises some awareness of the true dangers of the woods and makes people consider their safety. I don't want people to think I'm copying someone or making these things up. I'm just sharing my stories and experiences. Let's get into it. This was my first weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deeper in the forest, off one of the more popular trails. This wasn't unusual. If you've heard a mountain lion, you know it can sound like a woman screaming. Just as I was about to set off, my chief at the time asked to come along. I found this odd because the job seemed too insignificant for his rank, but I brushed it off. I was new and figured maybe he wanted to check my progress. We set off, making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little. We were joking around when he made a quick remark about taking even small jobs seriously because you never know what you'll find. That turned out to be some of the most valuable advice I ever got on this job, and I definitely learned my lesson later. But that's another story. We reached the area where the call originated and headed north of the trail. We heard the screams, and it sounded like a mountain lion, but something was really off about it. We kept walking toward the noise. About 10 minutes in, all of a sudden, it was like every sound was sucked out of the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I looked at my chief and saw he had the same nervous expression on his face. By the way he was acting, it felt like he'd encountered this before, which I now know to be true. Just as quickly as the silence came, I started to hear a low buzzing, but it wasn't just a buzzing. I could feel it vibrating through my entire body, so much that my ears and jaw began to hurt. The best way I can describe it is like when you're getting your teeth drilled at the dentist, but worse. Even my vision started to vibrate. And as that happened, I swear I saw a black figure, about 7 feet tall, step out from behind the trees in front of me. It started letting out that same scream as it bent down and began crawling toward us. Naturally, I freaked the hell out and stepped back to run. My chief grabbed my arm, hard, almost knocking me over, and put his other arm around me as he began to walk me out of the forest. Just as I was about to fight him and yell for us to run, he said in a calm voice, "Don't run. Don't talk. Don't look back. Just keep walking." I did exactly what he said. He obviously knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to find out what would happen if I did. Those 10 minutes were excruciating. I could tell it was crawling behind us by the buzzing in my head and the faint wailing sound it made. I wanted to run so badly. Eventually, I think it ran off because all the regular noise of the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. When we got back on the trail, I was shaking. I was in such shock I couldn't even cry. He let go of me and started walking back to the main base without saying a word about what had happened. I started screaming at him, asking what the hell that thing was. He said, and yes, I remember this word for word, "There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us, things we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now." He kept walking, and I followed behind, trying to make sense of what had happened. I obviously stayed in the job. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people and I loved nature, but in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. Honestly, I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags. I know this experience doesn't sound that scary in writing, but trust me, living through it was terrifying. And there are worse ones. Some of them are scarier, some are more explainable. I'm still debating whether to share all my stories. Maybe I'll see how I feel after posting this. I'd love to hear other people's experiences with the woods. Part 2. A lot of people seem to be interested in stairs found in the woods. I've seen a set of stairs in the woods once, and personally, it wasn't too scary. Just a bit creepy. I know a couple of my friends in the force, a force to be reckoned with, have some stories about stairs that they've mentioned in passing. If and when I decide to contact them for permission, maybe I'll post those. I do, however, have a story about a ladder that I wish I could forget, because just thinking about it gives me the creeps. My experience with the stairs is pretty tame, so I'll add another incident afterward. We were searching for a young girl who had wandered off. We found her. She's fine. The team was stretched out pretty far, so I was walking alone but within shouting distance of others. As I was walking, I saw a set of stairs. They sort of looked like they belonged there, but also didn't. They were overgrown, like they might have been the steps to someone's house, but I realized there was no way someone had put them there recently. I figured I'd stumbled upon one of those mysterious stairs my coworkers had talked about. I thought I'd be terrified if I ever saw them, but I wasn't. I did, however, feel an urge to walk up them, like something was pulling me toward them. Maybe it was just the excitement of finally seeing them, or maybe something darker. Someone nearby called out that they'd found something, and it snapped me back to reality. I'm really glad they did. I'm not sure what would have happened if I'd gone up. We found the girl, and all was well. On the way back, I mentioned to a partner that I had seen some stairs. She got worried and sort of grilled me about whether I touched or walked up them. I said no, and that was it. So yeah, pretty tame. Nothing too intense. I'm not going to lie or overemphasize anything here. This next occurrence isn't about stairs, but it is about a ladder, which I'd say is pretty similar. This happened sometime during my first year as a park ranger, around the start of summer when poison ivy really goes wild. We had to do weekly checks on the trails and the surrounding brush. My partner and I were assigned to check some of the less popular trails. We came to a smaller trail that forked for a couple of minutes and then joined up again. Being the idiots we were, we split up, planning to meet where it connected. We could still see each other through the brush in the middle, so we thought it was fine. He took the left path, and I took the right. As I was walking, keeping an eye out for ivy, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a large clearing in the middle of the trees. It looked man-made, perfectly round, as if someone had been maintaining it. There wasn't a single tree, bush, or even a weed. I was so focused on the lack of vegetation that I almost didn't notice the huge, unmistakable ladder standing right in the center. It was upright and leaning against absolutely nothing, like some unknown force was holding it. I looked up and saw a man at the top wearing a business suit. It almost seemed comical, like he'd walked straight out of a corporate office. His head was tilted back, staring up at the sky, and his mouth was wide open. I couldn't get a clear view, so I called to him a few times. No response. I circled the ladder, looking for wires or strings, hoping it was some sort of prank or art installation, but I found nothing. He looked like he was on display for some bizarre exhibition. I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't see my partner, so I radioed him to come over. While waiting, I made the stupid decision to touch the ladder. I know, terrible idea. Don't touch weird crap you find in the woods. I got a weird feeling just before my hand reached it, but I brushed it off and touched it anyway. The moment I did, the man at the top snapped his neck in this horrifically contorted way to look at me and let out an ungodly gasp, like he was drawing his last breath. His face was still warped in this gaping expression, eyelids and lips pulled back as though he were in perpetual shock. I stumbled back and grabbed my taser. Just then, I heard someone behind me and I spun around, taser raised. It was my partner, hands in the air to avoid getting tased. When I looked back, the ladder was flat on the ground and the man was gone. My partner asked what was going on, so I explained and begged him not to think I was crazy. Of course he didn't. He knew as well as I did that weird stuff like this happens more often than you think. We had to do a quick search for the guy, protocol, which I hated. I was praying we wouldn't find him. We didn't. I never saw anything like that again, and neither has anyone I've talked to. That guy was balancing on top of a ladder that wasn't leaning against anything. Maybe I met Houdini. When you see stuff like that, you make jokes, or you'll never move on. I'm really glad people are enjoying what I have to say. I'm not sure when I'll write more. Don't expect too much because this is both tiring and cathartic. I'm thinking of sharing some of the less spooky stories and the ones that are just about humans being weird. We'll see. I had done this 100 times before. Searching for missing campers was part of my job as a park ranger, and honestly, it usually ended with someone just lost or confused. But this time felt different from the start. My name is Ethan Harper, and I've been a ranger at Eagle's Shadow National Park for over 10 years. The place is vast, miles of dense forest, winding rivers, and jagged cliffs. It's beautiful, sure, but unforgiving if you don't know your way. Daniel Clean, the missing camper, had been out there for 3 days now. He hadn't left a single trace behind, which was strange. Most of the time, lost hikers left footprints, scraps of food wrappers, or at least a trail of some sort. But not Daniel. It was as if he had just disappeared. My team for this mission was small but solid. There was Sarah Morales, my second in command and one of the best rangers I knew. Calm under pressure, smart, and someone I could always count on. Then there was Dr. Greg Owens, the park's biologist. He wasn't much of a hiker, but he knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. Jake Donnelly and Mia Caldwell rounded out the team, 2 younger rangers, both eager but pretty green. I wasn't thrilled about taking rookies this deep into the forest, but I didn't have a choice. We set out in the late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the towering pines. As we hiked deeper into the Whispering Pines section of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the thick, almost suffocating silence that blanketed the area. It was more than that. An unspoken tension hung in the air, like the forest itself was watching us. "Ethan, look at this," Sarah called out, breaking the silence. I turned to see her crouching over some animal tracks, but there was something wrong with them. They led a few feet into the underbrush, and then nothing. The prints just stopped, as if whatever made them had been lifted straight into the air. "That's not possible," Greg muttered, scratching his head. He bent down to examine the tracks more closely, but even he didn't have an answer. No predator out here could do that. It doesn't make sense. We pressed on, though the unease was starting to settle in my gut. The deeper we ventured into the forest, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the wind. Just silence, and that silence felt wrong. The first real scare came when Jake froze in his tracks. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hear what?" I asked, scanning the trees around us. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. "A cry. It sounded like someone calling for help," Jake said, his face pale. "But it didn't sound right." "Probably just the wind," I said, as was trying to keep things calm. But inside, I knew something wasn't right. The wind hadn't made a sound all day. We finally reached Daniel's campsite just before the sun dipped below the horizon. His tent was still there, untouched. His supplies were all in order. It didn't make any sense. If Daniel had left, he hadn't taken anything with him. His backpack, his food, even his water bottle. Everything was still in place. "Why would he leave without his gear?" Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't have an answer for her. None of this added up. People don't just vanish without a trace. "We'll set up camp here for the night," I said, though I didn't like the idea of staying in this place any more than they did. "We'll keep searching in the morning." As we began to settle in, the light faded, and the forest seemed to change around us. The shadows grew longer, darker, as if they were creeping closer to our camp. Sarah sat by the fire, staring out into the trees. Suddenly, she stood up, her eyes wide. "I saw something," she said, her voice shaky. "Out there, a figure, It was watching us. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the tree line. Nothing, just endless trees stretching into the darkness. Maybe it's Daniel, Jake suggested, though he didn't sound too sure. Or maybe it's something else, Mia whispered, barely loud enough to hear. The air had grown colder, now the fire flickering weakly against the increasing chill. That's when we heard it. The first howl started low and distant, like the wind, but then it grew. It was a deep, guttural wail, almost human, but warped and wrong. It echoed through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. "Stay close," I ordered, gripping my flashlight tighter. But deep down, I wasn't sure staying close was going to be enough. This wasn't just a search anymore. Something was out there with us, and whatever it wasn't human. I didn't sleep much that night. None of us did. That strange howl echoed through the trees for hours, low and haunting, like something was calling out to us. We huddled by the fire, trying to convince ourselves it was just an animal, maybe a wolf or a coyote, but deep down, I think we all knew better. By morning, the fire had burned down to embers and the forest was eerily quiet again. Too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. The kind of silence that made your skin crawl. I glanced at Sarah, who was rubbing her arms, her eyes darting to the tree line every few seconds. "We should keep moving," she said, her voice low. "I don't like staying here." I nodded in agreement. The sooner we found Daniel, the better. The campsite had given us no answers, only more questions. Why would he leave his gear? Where did he go? And what was that awful sound we kept hearing? Jake, looking paler than usual, kicked dirt over the fire to put it out. "What do you think it was last night?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but the edge in his voice gave him away. "Just the wind," I lied. But Jake didn't look convinced. Neither was I. As we packed up, Greg tapped me on the shoulder. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the trees surrounding our campsite. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. Deep claw marks gouged the bark, long and jagged. They weren't there when we arrived last night. That doesn't look like anything I've seen before," Greg said, his voice shaking a little. "Too big for any animal around here." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Let's not jump to conclusions. Could have been a bear. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Bears didn't come this far into the forest, and these marks were way too big, too deep. We set off again, moving deeper into the whispering pines. But the deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to close in on us. The trees here were taller, their thick branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. Everything was dim, shadowy, like the woods were swallowing us whole. Hours passed, but we hadn't found a single clue about Daniel's whereabouts. Just more silence. And then out of nowhere, Jake stopped dead in his tracks. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, looking around wildly. I frowned. "Hear what?" Someone calling for help," he said, his face pale. It sounded like Daniel. We all stopped, listening, but I couldn't hear anything. "Jake, are you sure?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "I swear, Ethan, I heard him," he insisted, his hands trembling. He was calling my name. I exchanged a glance with Sarah. Something wasn't right. Jake was jumpy. Too jumpy, and it was starting to get to the others, Ingrid. "Maybe you're just hearing things, Jake," I said gently, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "We're all tired." Jake shook his head furiously. "No, I heard him. He's out there." "Let's keep moving," Sarah said, her voice tense. "Standing around here isn't going to help." Reluctantly, Jake fell in line, but I could tell he was still on edge, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes like he was expecting something or someone to jump out of the shadows. As we trekked further into the forest, the trees grew thicker, darker. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. I could feel the tension rising in the group, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves making us all jump. I tried to stay focused, but the forest seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. It was like we were being led in circles, and then, just as I was starting to think we'd never find our way out, Jake gasped and pointed ahead. "There! Do you see him?" We all looked, but I didn't see anything at first, just trees, shadows, and the dim light filtering through the branches. But then there was a figure, far off, just barely visible between the trees. "Daniel," I called out, taking a step forward. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, still and silent. I took another step, but Sarah grabbed my arm. "Ethan, wait. Something's wrong." She was right. The figure, it wasn't acting like a person. Its posture was off, that twisted in a way that made my stomach turn. And its eyes, they were black. Completely black. No whites, no pupils. Just empty, soulless darkness. My blood ran cold. "Jake, stay back," I warned. But Jake wasn't listening. He was already moving toward the figure, calling Daniel's name. "Jake, stop," I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching us, its dark eyes locked onto mine. Then, in an instant, it vanished, disappearing into the trees like it had never been there. "What the hell was that?" Greg whispered, his face pale. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we needed to get out of this forest. Fast. Something was out there. Something that wasn't Daniel, and it was watching us. We didn't talk much after that, not even Jake, who had been rattling on all day about seeing Daniel. Now he just walked in silence, his eyes darting from tree to tree like he was expecting something to jump out at him. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. I had seen it too. That twisted figure with its black, soulless eyes. The sun was starting to set again, and the shadows in the forest stretched longer, darker, until they seemed to blur together. We needed to make camp soon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that stopping would be a mistake. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving, to get out of this cursed place as fast as possible. But the others were exhausted, and the deeper we went into the whispering pines, the more it felt like we were going in circles. "We need to stop," Sarah said, her voice strained. "We can't keep going in the dark." I wanted to argue, but she was right. We were all worn out, and continuing blindly through the night would only make things worse. So we found a small clearing and set up camp. I made sure the fire was big, bigger than usual. Something about the light made me feel safer, even if it was just an illusion. As we sat around the fire, the silence felt heavier than ever. Jake hadn't said a word since we saw that thing in the trees. Greg was scribbling notes in his journal, though I couldn't imagine what he thought he was going to explain. And Sarah, she just stared into the flames, her face pale and drawn. "What do you think it was?" Mia finally asked, breaking the tension. I didn't want to answer, but I knew I had to. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but it wasn't Daniel." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "It looked like him though, didn't it?" I shook my head. "It might have looked like him, but that wasn't human. No way." Greg cleared his throat, looking up from his notes. "There are stories, legends about creatures in the forest, things that can mimic humans. Skinwalkers, I think they're called." "Skinwalkers?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "Like from those old Navajo stories?" Greg nodded. "They can take the form of people, animals, whatever they want. It's said they use voices to lure people in." "That's just a myth," Sarah cut in, her tone sharp. "Stories to scare kids around the campfire." "Maybe," Greg said. But what we saw out there, it fits the description." Before we could debate it further, a voice broke through the silence. "Help! Help me!" We all froze. It was a woman's voice calling out from the trees, and not just any voice. Mia's voice. We turned to Mia, who sat with us by the fire, her face draining of all color. That's my voice," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The voice called out again, sounding even closer this time. "Please help me. I'm lost." I stood up, heart pounding in my chest. "Stay close to the fire," I warned the others. "It's trying to trick us." "But it sounds so real," Mia whispered, her hands shaking. "How can it sound exactly like me?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're not going anywhere." The voice continued, now circling our camp, calling for help in Mia's voice, each time more desperate than the last. But we stayed put, huddled by the fire, refusing to be lured into the dark. And then, without warning, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. For a few minutes, no one moved, no one spoke. We just sat there, listening to the crackling fire and the eerie quiet of the forest. And then, out of nowhere, Mia screamed. We all turned to see her being dragged away into the darkness. Her legs kicking wildly, her hands clawing at the ground, Her scream echoed through the trees, and then, just like that, it was replaced by an awful, twisted version of her own voice, calling back to us. Help! Help me! I'm lost. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward where Mia had been dragged, but there was nothing. No sign of her, just more of that horrible silence. And the sound of her voice, no, the creature's voice, calling out from deeper in the forest. It's playing with us. Sarah whispered, her face pale. It's taking us one by one. I felt panic rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. We need to get to the old watchtower, I said, my voice firm. If there's any chance of getting help, that's our best shot. Greg looked doubtful. What makes you think we'll make it? We don't have a choice, I snapped, trying to keep control of the situation. It's either that or we sit here and wait for it to come back. Sarah nodded, standing up. Ethan's right. We need to move. We packed up quickly, the fire still burning behind us as we plunged back into the darkness of the forest. The creature's voice followed us the entire way, calling our names in familiar voices, always just out of sight. But no matter how fast we moved, I could feel it closing in. We were being hunted, and I had no idea how we were going to survive. We made it to the old watchtower just as the last light of the day faded behind the mountains. The wooden structure loomed above us, tall and weathered, with broken windows and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. It wasn't much, but it was our only chance. I wasn't even sure if the radio inside still worked, but right now it was better than being out in the open with that thing stalking us. Get inside, quick, I ordered, pushing Jake and Sarah through the door. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the creature right behind us, but the forest was eerily still. That was the worst part. The waiting. It was toying with us, and we all knew it. We barricaded the door with an old wooden beam, then piled up whatever we could find, broken chairs, an old desk, anything that might slow it down. Sarah rushed to check the radio, but from the look on her face, I could tell it wasn't good. It's dead, she muttered, kicking the useless machine in frustration. No power, no signal, we're trapped. Jake sat down in the corner, his hands shaking. We're not going to make it, are we? We will, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. We just need to hold out until morning. But even as I said the words, the whispering began. At first it was faint, like wind slipping through the cracks in the walls, but then it grew louder, more distinct. Voices, familiar voices. Ethan. It was Mia's voice, soft and pleading, coming from just outside of the door. Ethan, please help me. My heart raced. I knew it wasn't really her, but hearing her voice so close, so desperate, made it hard to think straight. The others heard it too. Jake's eyes were wide with fear, and even Sarah looked shaken. It's not real, Sarah said firmly, as if trying to convince herself. It's just the creature trying to trick us. But the voices didn't stop. Now Greg was calling out, his voice sounding broken and pained. Ethan, help me. It's too dark. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. The whispers circled the tower, growing louder, more insistent. And then something began scratching at the door. Slow, deliberate scrapes, like claws dragging along the wood. It's here, Jake whispered, his face pale. He was shaking uncontrollably now, curled up in the corner, rocking back and forth. It's here. Stay calm, I told him, though my own heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. It can't get in, not with the door barricaded. But the scratching grew louder. It sounded like nails raking across the wood. And then the voices began again, this time in Sarah's voice. Ethan, let me in. I shot a glance at Sarah, who was standing by the window, her eyes wide with terror. That's my voice, she whispered, backing away from the wall. The creature was taunting us, using our own voices against us, and the fear in the room was rising by the second. Jake was nearly hysterical, and even Sarah, who had always been the strongest, was starting to crumble. We can't stay here, I said finally, my voice tight with panic. It's only a matter of time before it gets in. How? Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. We can't outrun it. We can't fight it. I didn't have an answer, but I knew we had to do something. Sitting here, waiting for the creature to break through, was suicide. Then an idea hit me. It was desperate, but it might just work. Distract it, I said suddenly, looking at Sarah. I'll distract it, draw it away from the door while you and Jake make a run for it. No way, Sarah protested. You're not going out there alone. I have to, I said firmly. It's the only way. If I can draw it far enough away, you might be able to slip past it and make it to the ranger station. There's another radio there. If it still works, you can call for help. Sarah looked torn, but she nodded. Okay, she said softly. But you come back. Promise me. I'll try, I said, though I knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep. With one last deep breath, I unblocked the door, the scratching growing louder the moment I touched the beam. The voices stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl from the other side. It was waiting for me. I threw the door open and sprinted into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I could hear the creature behind me, its footsteps fast and heavy, chasing me through the trees. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. Come on, I yelled, my voice hoarse. You want me? Here I am. I heard a snarl, close now. Too close. My legs burned, but I pushed harder, darting between the trees, trying to lead it away from the watchtower. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure running alongside me. It was the creature. Its body shifted, its face twisted, until it looked just like me. For the first time in my life, I felt true terror. It was wearing my face, and then it lunged. What I'm about to tell you is something I still go to therapy for. It happened back during the summer of 2009. I started going to therapy around the start of 2010, and I've been going ever since. It wasn't my idea, it was my parents'. In a way, the only reason I still go is to keep them from worrying themselves sick over me. Not that I don't derive some small benefit from it, but what I tell my parents, my therapist, and I talk about, and what we actually talk about, are two very different things. Around the start of the holiday season, back in 2008, I was a sophomore earth sciences student at UCC Davis. The university offers some summer placements to students who want to gain a little work experience. Although they're mostly dreary research assignments, I happened across one that piqued my interest in a way the others didn't. In short, I had the opportunity to spend the summer working as a fire lookout in the Trinity National Forest. It was a 3-month-long placement, but I'd be paid for my time, and completing a piece of long-term field research would look very good on my resume. I applied, I was accepted, and several months later, I was told that I'd be posted to the Tomhead Mountain Lookout, which was about 30 miles west of the city of Red Bluff and about 130 miles north of Sacramento. Since I didn't own a car back then, I had to catch a bus all the way up to Red Bluff. From there, I hitchhiked along the 36 and then hiked up into the hills until I reached the flat-topped peak of Tomhead Mountain, where the old fire lookout tower stood. The first thing that struck me was that the 20-foot-tall lookout tower was made of wood. I figured a fire lookout tower would have been built with less flammable materials, but since it had been constructed back in the 30s, I guess wood was all they had at hand. It didn't make for the best first impression. After all, that tower was supposed to be my home for the next 3 months. But in the end, I managed to get myself settled in, and the place started to feel more cozy than decrepit. A big part of the assignment involved what we call numerical weather predictions, or NWP. I won't bore you with the exact science of it, but it's somewhat similar to the kind of prediction models that allow news channels to give long-term weather forecasts. In the context of being a fire lookout, we can use these same models to predict the dry spells or heat waves that might result in a wildfire, because prevention is always better than a cure. Working on weather analysis kept me occupied for a precious few hours each day, while hydration became an important aspect of my daily routine. But outside of maintaining myself and my equipment, I had very little to keep me occupied. To kill time, I'd go for walks in the woods surrounding the lookout tower. Sometimes I'd visit the abandoned miner's cabin, sometimes the old campground that lay just beyond it. I'd keep my bear spray with me, just in case I had any close encounters of the fur kind. Haha. but I never saw any people around. At first, the seclusion was a welcome escape from the hustle and bustle of the big city. By the end of the first week, my social battery had been thoroughly recharged, but by the end of week 2, once the boredom had really started to set in, I found myself pining for human contact in a way that was very much surprising to me. I had my old Samsung cell phone with me, along with a very efficient solar-powered charger, but the lack of solid coverage meant it was more useful as a paperweight. If I walked up to this one spot on the ridgeline, I could manage to squeeze the odd text message through, but any sort of phone call was out of the question, and that was something I hadn't anticipated. It sounds foolish to think about it now, but I figured that since I was so high up on a mountain, getting decent cell reception wouldn't be an issue. In reality, it was all about proximity to towers. Communicating through the odd text message was all well and good, but by the end of that first month, being the only living soul for miles really started to grind on me. When a Trinity Forest Ranger showed up with my second month's supplies, I was so happy to see her that I almost hugged her when she stepped out of her 4x4. She could tell how happy I was to see her and joked about me going a little stir-crazy up there all on my lonesome. She was nice enough to stay a while and drink some of my bad coffee. Then, once I'd hauled my supplies from her trunk, she drove off into the sunset. After that, knowing I wouldn't see another person in the flesh for a whole month actually made me kind of emotional. You don't realize what social animals we are until you really cut yourself off from other people. I once read that in prison, solitary confinement is one of the cruelest punishments. By the second month, I'd be out on one of my regular walks and see something move out of the corner of my eye. But then, when I turned to look, nothing. There's a lot of wildlife out there in Trinity, so for the first half dozen times it happened, I figured it was just a fox or a raccoon skittering away from me, frightened. But then, after a while, the shadows in the corners of my eyes started getting larger and clearer, until eventually they weren't just in my peripheries anymore. I'd see something moving in the trees up ahead of me, too big to be a bobcat or mountain lion, the wrong shape to be an elk or deer. I'd stop, look, listen, but nothing ever moved, nothing ever stirred. By the time I started to call out, "Hello?" into the empty woods ahead of me, I had developed a genuine concern for my own psychological well-being. I tried a dozen different things to lessen the feelings of loneliness and isolation, and although talking to myself might make it sound like I'd lost my mind, I can assure you that it helped. Pouring my thoughts out onto this page helped too, as did singing my favorite songs. After a day or two of accentuating the positives and eliminating the negatives, I began to feel considerably better. But then came the day when, as I set off on one of my routine walks through the woods, I caught a glimpse of a human figure standing among the trees. I turned my head to look in their direction, and like all the other things I'd seen moving in the corner of my eyes, this person didn't dart off among the trees. Quite the opposite, in fact. They remained as still as a statue, limbs very rigid, completely unmoving. In all honesty, the person's sudden presence scared the crap out of me, and the odd, unnatural way that they were standing did not help either. But then, the more I stared at this mysterious figure, the more I realized that it wasn't a person at all. I took a few steps toward it, consumed with curiosity, only to discover that what I was looking at was some kind of wooden effigy. Someone had constructed a sort of skeleton out of wooden planks. Then, after attaching what looked to be chicken wire as a skull and rib cage, they had stuffed the cavities with a variety of dead roots and leaves. I remember being almost mesmerized by it, not because it exuded any kind of eldritch power or anything crazy like that, but because it was so exquisitely constructed. I remained in this sort of blissful state of thoughtlessness until a rather alarming thought occurred to me. That effigy had been staked into the earth less than a football field away from the lookout tower, and it almost certainly hadn't been there the previous day. That meant that someone had walked all the way up Tomhead Mountain in the middle of the night, after putting a ton of work into their curious art installation, only to stake it just meters away from where I was laying my head each night. I could think of a dozen innocent reasons why someone might do such a thing, but still, there was something about the effigy's presence that just didn't sit right with me. This probably sounds incredibly juvenile to some, but as I stood there, face to wooden face with the mysterious effigy, I was suddenly filled with the overwhelming urge to knock it over. I didn't like the idea of going about my business with this twig man just standing there, looking all creepy like he was. It's never something I do now, but I obviously can't speak for the much younger, college-age me, who raised a hand, reached out, and prepared to knock the thing off its little stubby feet. But I also remember this feeling of intense hesitation as I reached out to touch it, how it almost felt like I was desecrating some sacred sculpture. The sensation, hold me for 1 second, but in the next, it felt like a challenge. Then, with one heavy shove, I sent the effigy falling back into the dirt with a little dry thud. In the moments that followed, I felt the hairs on my arms standing on end as I was struck by the sudden cognizance that whoever planted that twig man might still actually be close by. I looked around, then over both shoulders, making sure the coast was clear. I don't believe in any kind of sixth sense, but if there ever was a time in my life when I felt like I was being watched, it was then. I decided not to finish my walk that day and headed back to the tower to make sure that I had that second can of bear mace handy. I wouldn't say that I was scared, more apprehensive of what the effigy's sudden presence might actually mean. I later considered the possibility that some renegade artist with a penchant for hiking might have mocked that thing up on the fly. At first, I had this irrational image in my head of some unhinged redneck hauling the completed effigy up the mountain like a character from an unwritten Thomas Harris novel. But the alternative, that it was a spur-of-the-moment creative thing, was a considerably less unnerving explanation. No one had put that thing there to spook me. They probably didn't even know that I was in the area to begin with. The more I thought about that, the more I felt strangely guilty for having shoved it over. The next morning, I decided to head out on one of my morning routines, and while I was at it, I'd stake that twig man back into the earth and just leave him upright, just as I'd found him. I completed that morning routine, jotted down a few early morning weather observations, and then set off in the direction of Tomhead Springs with some soap and a washcloth. When I reached the spot where the twig man had been lying in the dirt, I was startled to find him standing upright again. Someone had returned, possibly in the middle of the night, and had placed that twig man back in his vertical position. I wasn't outright frightened by this, just more unnerved. I also figured that if it were me who had made the twig man, this silent companion I could visit on hikes so often, I'd also be kind of bummed if some jerk came along and just pushed him over. Besides, if he was someone else's silent but stoic companion, maybe he could be mine too. I gave myself a scrub down at the springs and made my way back to the lookout, passing the twig man as I went, and then spent the rest of the day making weather observations and reading the books that I had brought with me. Then, once the sun went down and my very early bedtime approached, I climbed into my sleeping bag and attempted to catch some shut-eye. I think I might have just been on the cusp of drifting off when a deeply alarming scent began to drift into my nostrils. It was the smell of smoke. I leapt out of my sleeping bag, threw on my shorts and boots, and was about to radio the ranger office over in Redding when a flicker of flame in the woods below caught my eye. The fire was close, very close, and by the look of things, it was still small enough for me to fight. I grabbed the tower's small fire extinguisher, rushed down the stairs, and then bolted toward the source of the fire. If I could put it out right then and there, I'd not only save the state of California hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I'd also save acres upon acres of protected forest. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, and then, when I saw what was burning, I experienced one of the strangest sensations of my entire life. It was the twig man. That's what was burning. And although I carried on hurtling toward it, I'd never seen anything so repellent in all my life. The desire to put the damn thing out and prevent a potentially massive forest fire kept propelling me through the woods. But upon considering the dual questions of who had set the twig man on fire to begin with and why, that was the first moment I felt fear. After putting out the fire, I got to thinking about who or what might be to blame. I couldn't rule out vandalism as the motive, but even the most thoughtless of vandals would think twice before setting a wildfire in a national forest. I also couldn't rule out the possibility that the person who had set the twig man on fire was the same person who put him there in the first place. I doubted very much that someone who had taken the time to create such a sculpture would also be willing to burn the entire forest down. The very nature of the twig man suggested its creator felt a reverence for nature, not a contempt for it. But in turn, that raised another question. What if Twigman's creator set him on fire because they knew I'd come running to put it out? Since I was just a few days from my second and final resupply, the same ranger who had visited me the previous month decided to head up to the mountain a little early, both to drop off my supplies and check out the remains of the Twigman. When she got there and I walked her out into the woods, there wasn't much left of him to look at, but the sight of him provoked a very familiar reaction from the ranger. She had all the same questions I did, but all that mattered was that I had the fire, dealt with it quickly and professionally. In her words, I should have been very proud of myself. For the next few days, I felt perfectly content to be alone. It was like the fire and the praise I'd gotten for my decisive action had topped up my social gas tank, so to speak, satisfying that crucial third layer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When I went on my regular walks, I didn't see any shadows moving in the corners of my eyes. I wasn't overcome by that creeping feeling that I was being watched. I felt at peace, both within and without, and that was the start of my third and final month up on the mountain. But towards the end of it, that same dread-inducing feeling that I was losing my mind returned with a vengeance. Having finished all the books that I had brought with me and having grown sick of journaling my own pressingly repetitive stream of consciousness, I was more plagued by tedium than ever. On the surface, this seemed to lead to a drastic decline in my mental health. I started seeing things again, like people moving in the woods, and the encroaching sense of paranoia resulted in a handful of completely sleepless nights. The exhaustion exacerbated every other symptom, until at one stage I started to wonder if I could complete the full 3-month term. I tried as best I could to power through, taking things one day and one night at a time, until finally, I had just 7 more nights to go. I tried to mark the occasion with a minor celebration and opened up a can of warm soda that I had been saving for a very metaphorical rainy day. Then, after an evening spent trying to keep my spirits high, I settled down to sleep. 1 down, 6 to go, I told myself. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Hours later, maybe around 1 or 2 in the morning, I opened my eyes and heard what sounded like something moving among the trees below my tower. It was a very heavy sound, like something large and bipedal was stomping through the underbrush. Seeing as that was a zoological impossibility, I decided to climb out of my sleeping bag and go take a look. Having picked up my flashlight on the way out, I aimed its beam down into the darkness below me, and in an instant, I saw them. To my horrified astonishment, I discovered that the tower I was in was surrounded by at least a dozen hooded figures. Beneath me, just out of sight at the base of the tower, was the source of the noise that I'd been hearing. As alarming as the encounter was, I didn't immediately understand the significance of the stranger's presence. There was always the possibility that they were simply a group of late-night hikers who happened across the tower and were merely curious. But when I called out to them and asked them to identify themselves, I didn't hear a word in reply. I took a few steps out and then headed down the stairs a little so I could see what was occurring at the base of the tower, which, if you remember, was only around 10 to 15 feet down. More hooded figures stood below me, and the sound they were making came from the fact that they were stacking large bales of twigs underneath the tower. It was kindling. They were going to set the tower on fire, with me inside it. The first thing I thought to do was rush back into the cabin to report what was happening via my radio. While I was doing that, I threw on my clothes and boots, grabbed my flashlight and my survival knife, then walked out onto the balcony, just in time for the fire to start. I didn't waste a second. I ran along to where the stairs were, then went down 2 or 3 flights so that the fall wouldn't break my legs. I figured I'd have to jump, as whoever was surrounding the lookout would probably be expecting me to head down the stairs once they set fire to it. Since they seemed perfectly content to roast me alive in what amounted to a very serious crime, I figured that they wouldn't be too excited about me escaping the scene. I remember jumping, knocking the wind out of myself, then being almost certain that I had just sprained an ankle until I put weight on it. Somehow, I was fine. And I also took the nearest hooded figure by surprise, which in turn gave me this brief but golden opportunity to slip past him. If I moved at speed, I honestly thought that I was about to get shot or stabbed or worse. I guess the person I ran at nearly did get me with something, but it was a stun gun. As I ran past them, they lunged at me, and I saw this little tiny bolt of lightning dancing in the air for a split second before I slipped past them and made my escape. I remember hearing a furious scream from someone, screaming about me getting away, but by then I was long gone, half running and half sliding down the mountain as fast as I could in complete darkness. I was lucky not to fall and accidentally off myself, but there was no catching me. I made it all the way down the mountain without seeing so much as a flashlight behind me. I ran and ran until I was too tired to run anymore. Then, after what seemed like hours upon hours of rummaging through the brush, I came across a little place calling itself the Rocky Ridge Hunting Club, along with a small group of hunters preparing to take advantage of the dawn's calm. By that point, the sky was light enough that I could point out the plume of smoke rising from Tomad Mountain, and within the hour, choppers were making passes over the lookout, creating artificial rain while the ground-based fire crews rushed to the scene. I should have felt exhausted. I should have been dead on my feet. But when I saw that first chopper fly over us heading in the direction of Tom Head, I felt 10 feet tall. I'd made it to that hunting club just in time to avert a major ecological disaster, and I felt like a hero. But I was not treated like one. Even after I explained everything that had happened, with the twig man, the hooded figures, and the fires, it was me who got the blame for burning down the Tom Head Mountain Lookout. According to the fire crews, there was no evidence of an accelerant being used, but it was impossible to tell if the source of the fire had been inside or outside the cabin. I guess it was my preposterous explanation that swayed the opinions of the Forest Service, because on their command, I was arrested on charges of arson, endangerment, and destruction of government property. My defense attorney told me that I dodged being charged with a serious environmental crime by the skin of my teeth, the kind that's only one step down from outright terrorism. She also told me that my best option by far was to basically plead temporary insanity at my trial. She made it out like I was some upstanding citizen who'd merely been unfortunate enough to have suffered a kind of psychiatric crisis as a result of severe and prolonged isolation. I pleaded guilty, got 100 hours of highway trash picking, and a mandatory psychiatric evaluation at the behest of the state of California. I tried to get my parents to believe me, but unfortunately, they took my attorney's arguments as gospel, and instead of the truth, chose to believe that I'd gone temporarily crazy. But unlike my attorney, whose interest ended once the money dried up, Mom and Dad wouldn't let it go. They hounded me until eventually I gave in and agreed to go to regular counseling sessions. I didn't want to take pills for something I knew I didn't have. So to them, therapy was the next best thing. But these days, I don't talk to my therapist about how I'm scared to lose my mind again, or how it might be a symptom of a much more frightening disease. I talk to him about how painful it can be when you tell someone the absolute truth and they choose not to believe you. for the sake of their own sanity. I should have known something was off when my supervisor called me in for an urgent adjustment to my usual shift. A bunch of people had recently bailed on the night schedule without much of an explanation, so it landed in my lap. At first, I wasn't exactly thrilled, but a small part of me was curious about what it would be like to watch the park after dark. I guess I figured it would be hours of quiet, broken up by the occasional hoot of an owl or the flicker of a flashlight. So there I was, hiking up the tower's endless steps with a backpack full of coffee, energy drinks, and whatever courage I thought I had. The night air tasted cool, almost damp, and my boots crunched on the gravel in a way that echoed, like I wasn't the only one listening. By the time I made it to the top, my legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to shrug it off. The tower's narrow wooden platform led me into a cramped room with 3 walls of glass and a 4th wall hosting a door. There was a rickety bed, a tiny kitchen corner with a mini fridge and a microwave, plus a desk where the radio station sat, blinking. I gave the radio a test. Static popped and hissed, but Donnie's voice eventually came through, saying something about how I'd better make friends with my flashlight because the moon was barely out. That bit of chatter steadied my nerves a little. At least I wasn't alone in the world. I stepped onto the balcony to get a proper look at my surroundings. Trees stretched in nearly every direction, their tops swaying faintly in the breeze. Off to my right was the lagoon, which looked more like a giant puddle choked with algae, lily pads, and random debris. The water sat way too still for my comfort. Meanwhile, the usual nighttime orchestra kicked up. Frogs, crickets, leaves rustling. It was almost soothing. I leaned over the balcony rail, scanning the area with binoculars. At first I spotted nothing except a few moonlit clearings and shadows that I assumed were just logs or rocks. But near one of the ridges, I caught a glimpse of something pale, a shape that stood out against the dark. It looked suspiciously like a person. Maybe a kid wearing a blanket with 2 big circles where eyes might be, a ghost costume, in the middle of summer, on federal land, with no one else around. It threw me off so hard, I nearly dropped the binoculars. I blinked, steadying the lenses again. The little ghost figure was still staring straight at the tower. Part of me wanted to believe it was just some leftover prank, but my gut churned in protest. I pulled out my handheld radio and called Donnie. "Hey man, you in earshot? I don't even know how to say this. There's a kid dressed like a ghost on the ridge right below the big dip in the tree line." Donnie sounded as confused as I was. "A ghost? You serious?" "As a heart attack," I muttered. "Could be some lost camper kid or maybe a runaway. Want to check it out before it becomes our problem?" He sighed but agreed. "Fine, I'll head that way. Keep your eyes on them and let me know if they move." I caught a flicker of Donnie's flashlight weaving through the dark beneath me. He wasn't fast, but at least he was going in the right direction. I stayed on the balcony, sweeping the binoculars around, glancing back at the ridge every few seconds. The figure didn't move at all, like it was a statue with a bedsheet draped over it. Then, just as Donnie's light got close, his flashlight went out. The beam vanished so abruptly that I thought maybe my eyes had tricked me. My radio let out a burst of static, and Donnie's voice cut off mid-sentence. In that exact same instant, the forest dropped every sound it had. Not one chirp, not one rustle. The hush felt alive, like I'd stepped into some bubble of silence. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I stumbled back into the tower, practically yanking the door off its hinges to close it. I tried calling Donnie again. Nothing but static. My flashlight spotlighted the corners of the tower's room, and everything looked normal, but my nerves were lit up. I decided to go back outside, maybe yell into the darkness a few times. That was when I noticed a shape below, next to the first flight of steps. It looked like a woman, but impossibly tall and unnaturally thin, with a soaked dress clinging to her body. Her hair dangled in wet clumps, and she seemed bent at odd angles, like someone had tried putting a puzzle together the wrong way. She wasn't just dripping, she looked swollen with water, her skin a sickly bluish color that glistened in the moonlight. She lifted her face, eyes cloudy like murky pond water. Her mouth stretched open, far too wide. A sound emerged, a high-pitched gurgling, way too loud to be human. My stomach flipped. Every cell in my body demanded I get the hell away from that door. I jumped back inside, locking the knob as fast as I could, though a flimsy piece of metal didn't feel like it could stop anything. The radio squawked uselessly from the desk, providing zero comfort. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, trying to catch my breath, shining my flashlight at the door, in case the woman decided to break it down. I could still sense her presence outside, but I had no idea if she'd left or if she was crawling her way up to the balcony. Then, the closet door creaked open. I nearly dropped my flashlight. Instinct forced me to raise the knife I'd grabbed earlier, my heart hammering like an engine in my chest. And out stepped a little ghost, the same ragged sheet I'd seen on the ridge. That was enough to make me want to scream, but then the figure lifted it off, revealing Marvin, Donnie's son, sporting a grin so wide you'd think he'd scored the prank of the century. I felt heat flush my face. "Marvin, what the hell?" Before the kid could answer, another voice crackled over the radio. "There he is. How'd he do, Marv? He freak out?" Recognizing Donnie's voice, I stomped across the room and grabbed the radio. "You set me up?" I yelled, so furious my voice went ragged. "Hiding your kid in my tower, dressing him like some cheap little ghost?" Donnie and his other son, Joey, started howling with laughter. Apparently, they'd been planning this for days, sneaking Marvin in here before my shift, making a show of him standing on the ridge, cutting the power to Donnie's flashlight at the perfect moment. I'm sure they expected me to lose it. Mission accomplished. "Relax," Donnie cackled. "It was just some harmless fun, man. Thought we'd welcome you to the graveyard shift in style. How's your blood pressure?" I felt relief and anger crash together like thunderclouds in my gut. But then, what about that thing outside? I choked out. Silence. Then Donnie let out a short laugh, one that sounded less certain. "Wait, slow down. You think I hired an extra for your personal horror movie?" He chuckled. "We only planned the ghost, kid. That's it. No ladies in sight." His words hit me like a punch to the ribs. Even if they'd orchestrated a bunch of details to fool me, that shrieking creature I'd seen was way beyond a backyard prank. I couldn't shake the memory of that stretched skin. I had the insane urge to fling open the tower door just to see if she was still out there, but the possibility kept me rooted in place. Marvin must have seen the alarm still etched on my face because his grin faltered. Dad," he said softly into his own walkie. "What if someone else is out here?" The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. After a moment, Donnie tried to keep it light. "Look, maybe you saw a deer, or your eyes played tricks on you. It's late, and you're wound up. We'll swing by once we finish up. Sound good?" I clicked off the radio without answering. My anger was draining, replaced by an old, deep fear that stuck to my thoughts like tar. Part of me wanted to chase Marvin out with a scolding, but a stronger part, maybe the protective side, wouldn't risk letting him leave alone until this thing was explained or gone. I had zero trust in that black stretch of forest. I paced the tower, double-checking windows and fiddling with the lock on the door. It felt so thin, like a stiff wind could knock it down. Meanwhile, the night outside remained too quiet for comfort. Marvin looked just as jumpy as me now, hugging his arms close to his body, like the joke wasn't so funny anymore. Time crawled. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement outside, a branch shifting or a swirl of mist over the lagoon, but I never saw that gaunt figure again. It was almost worse, not knowing if it was still lurking beneath the tower. At one point, a faint screech echoed from somewhere in the woods, and I nearly tripped over my own feet, spinning around to face the door. Marvin squeaked, then tried to laugh it off, but his eyes were wide. By the time the first streaks of dawn arrived, I felt shredded. My chest was tight, my muscles stiff from clenching. Donnie came through on the walkie once more to say something about making the rounds, but I barely registered it. All I could think was that if I had to do another shift here, locked in this fishbowl, I'd lose my mind. Jokes were one thing, but that woman's milky gaze was not something you faked with store-bought makeup. I couldn't explain it, and Donnie wouldn't listen. That left me with one real choice. "All right, Marvin, time to go," I said quietly and escorted him down the tower steps in the fragile early light. The two of us jumped at every rustle or bump. I was armed with that kitchen knife, feeling ridiculous but unable to relax. The lagoon looked almost peaceful in daylight, but I was too on edge to appreciate it. By the end of that endless descent, my mind was made up. The moment I got the chance, I'd inform the higher-ups I wasn't staying on nights. Not another hour. Let them call me paranoid. Whatever I'd seen out there, it wasn't just a trick of the dark. Something in those woods had noticed me, and I had no intention of sticking around for round two. Marvin and I trudged toward the ranger station, the first rays of sun hitting the trees in a washed-out glow. Part of me expected to see that soggy figure trailing behind us, but every time I looked over my shoulder, it was only empty space. Maybe that was even scarier. It meant it could still be anywhere. I'd always believed the night shift was nothing but quiet hours, but nothing from this point forward would ever feel normal again. When I glanced back at the tower, all I saw was a lonely shape against the morning sky and the silent, unmoving lagoon. But I remembered that scream. I remembered the hush that followed it too, and I wondered if maybe it was the woods themselves sending a warning. Some things aren't meant to be watched after dark, at least not by anyone who wants to make it home sane. I never liked the idea of working the night shift. The forest feels different when the sun goes down, darker, heavier, like it's hiding something. But I didn't have a choice tonight. Too many of the other guys quit the night shift recently, and they were short-staffed. So here I am, driving through the winding dirt roads, heading to my post at the fire tower. Normally I work during the day, when the trees look green and peaceful. At night, though, they look like tall, twisted shadows. I packed extra coffee to keep me awake and alert. It wasn't going to be easy. The fire tower is deep in the woods, far from the main road and near this big, foggy lake. Even during the day, that lake gives me the creeps. The mist just hangs over it like something's waiting underneath, ready to crawl out when no one's looking. I try not to think about that as I park the truck and grab my gear. It's just one night, I tell myself. The climb up the fire tower feels longer than usual, maybe because the sky is already so dark. By the time I reach the top, the stars are just beginning to peek through the clouds, and everything is quiet. Too quiet. Usually I can hear crickets or owls by now, but tonight it's just still. I drop my bag inside the small room at the top of the tower and take a deep breath. This is my space for the next 8 hours, a tiny room with windows on all sides overlooking a sea of trees. I've always loved this view during the day. You can see for miles, but at night it's like looking into an endless black ocean with no shore in sight. I do my routine check first, scanning the area with my binoculars. It's my job to keep an eye out for any signs of fire or danger. Usually, I don't see much at night, just the faint outline of trees and maybe the distant shimmer of the lake. But tonight, something feels different. I can't shake this uneasy feeling. Just as I'm about to sit down with my coffee, I catch a glimpse of something on the ridge. At first, I think I'm seeing things, but when I focus the binoculars, I know it's real. There, on the far edge of the ridge, is a figure. A small one, like a kid. They're wearing what looks like a ghost costume. You know, the kind with the white sheet and the dark holes for eyes. But it's June. Who wears a costume in June? A chill runs down my spine. I blink, thinking maybe it's just my eyes playing tricks, but the figure is still there. Standing, perfectly still, staring, or at least it feels like it's staring right at me. I grab the radio. "Dan, you there?" I ask, my voice shaking a little. Dan is the only other person out here tonight at a nearby station. He answers, laughing. "What's up? You sound spooked. I see something weird on the ridge, like a kid in a costume." Dan chuckles. "You're seeing ghosts, man. I'll check it out." I keep my eyes glued to the ridge as Dan's flashlight flickers in the distance, getting closer to where I saw the figure. I wait, my heart pounding. I sit in my chair, gripping the radio tightly, my eyes never leaving the ridge. The flashlight beam from Dan's lantern bounces as he walks closer to the spot where I saw the kid. My heart races, my stomach twists. This doesn't feel right. It's too quiet out here. No wind, no crickets, not even the usual rustling of the trees. Just this thick, unsettling silence hanging over everything. I keep replaying what I saw in my head. It wasn't just the figure that was strange, it was how still it was. Too still. And the way the ghostly sheet hung over the small body gave it a creepy, unnatural look. I watch as Dan's flashlight gets closer and closer and closer to the any second now, he'll reach it. And then, we'll figure out what's going on. Maybe it's just some prank, some kid sneaking out for a scare. Yeah, that has to be it. Kids do dumb stuff all the time. Dan, getting close, I ask, my voice breaking the heavy silence. I try to sound calm, but I can't hide the nerves creeping in. Almost there, he answers through the radio. His voice sounds normal, like this is no big deal. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it really is nothing. Then suddenly, Dan's flashlight flickers. It sputters once, twice, and then it dies completely. The light goes out and Dan disappears into the darkness. I lean forward, pressing the radio to my mouth. Dan? Dan, you there? My voice comes out shakier than I wanted it to. No answer. Dan! I shout into the radio, the tension building in my chest. I scan the ridge, but now it's just black. No light, no movement, nothing. My hand tightens around the binoculars as I sweep them over the spot where I last saw him. The eerie stillness is suffocating. The wind should be blowing by now. The trees should be swaying, but everything feels frozen in place. Then, just when I think it can't get any worse, the forest itself seems to react. The quiet becomes louder, if that even makes sense. The absence of sound presses against my ears. It's like the whole forest is holding its breath, waiting. I try the radio again. Dan, come on, man, quit messing around. Still nothing. A sick feeling starts crawling up my spine. Something is wrong. Really wrong. I reach for my flashlight and shine it out over the trees, sweeping it back and forth across the ridge. But as soon as the beam hits the spot where the kid had been standing, I stop. Dead. There's nothing there. The figure, the kid, the ghost. Whatever it was, it's gone. My breath catches in my throat. I should feel relieved that it's not there anymore, but instead, it feels worse. My mind races. Did the kid run off? Was this all some weird prank, or was it something else? I start pacing inside the small room, trying to think, trying to figure out what to do. Every second that Dan doesn't respond feels like a weight pressing down on me. What if something happened to him? What if... Suddenly, a new thought hits me, sending a wave of cold fear through my body. What if that figure I saw wasn't a kid at all? What if it was something else entirely? I grab the radio one last time, my voice shaking. Dan, please answer. This isn't funny anymore. But all I hear is the static of dead air. I stand frozen in the tower, staring out into the pitch-black forest. The radio is still in my hand, but I've stopped trying to call Dan. There's only silence on the other end, like the whole world has gone quiet just to mess with me. My heart pounds so hard I can feel it in my throat. I shine my flashlight down toward the forest below, hoping, praying to catch some sign of Dan. Anything. His flashlight flickering back on, his voice calling out to me. But nothing. The beam of light just cuts through the thick darkness, barely making a dent in the inky black. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I see movement. At first, I think I'm imagining it. I sweep the flashlight back and forth across the base of the tower, searching for what I saw. That's when I spot it. Something, or someone, is moving through the trees. It's slow at first, a shadow gliding between the trunks. I narrow my eyes and aim the light directly at it. My hands start to tremble. A figure steps into view, and my stomach drops. It's not Dan. It's not even close to Dan. It's a woman. At least, I think it's a woman. Her body is all wrong, tall and thin, so thin that her skin looks like it's stretched over her bones, and she's soaking wet. Her eyes glow yellow, and her clothes cling to her in a way that makes my skin crawl. Her skin looks decayed, like she's been dead for days. But it's her eyes that make my blood run cold. They're wide, too wide, and pure yellow. No pupils, just this blank, terrifying stare. Her mouth hangs open in an unnatural way, like she's about to scream, but no sound comes out. For a second, I can't move. I'm locked in place, staring down at her, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. This can't be real. It just can't. But then she starts moving. Fast. Too fast. She's at the base of the tower now, looking up at me with that awful blank stare. And then, without warning, she starts to climb. I snap out of my daze, my heart hammering in my chest. She's coming up the stairs. Too fast. Way too fast for something that should even be alive. I slam the door to the cabin shut and lock it, my hands shaking so badly I can barely turn the latch. Footsteps echo up the stairs, heavy and fast, like she's sprinting. My brain races, trying to figure out what to do. There's no way out. I'm trapped up here. I grab a knife from the kitchen drawer, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turn white. I back away from the door, my eyes can hear her getting closer, closer, until her footsteps stop, right outside the door. I hold my breath, praying she'll go away. But then, the door handle rattles. She's trying to get in. Suddenly, I hear a loud thud, like something slamming against the door. Then another. The door shakes in its frame, and I know it won't hold much longer. My heart races, my whole body trembling as I back into the corner of the cabin, clutching the knife like it's my only lifeline. Then I hear it, a faint, wet dripping sound. Behind me. I turn slowly, my flashlight beam shaking as it moves across the room. The supply cabinet. The door is wide open, and standing in front of it, grinning through the same dark-eyed sheet I saw earlier, is the child. I can't breathe. My heart feels like it's going to explode out of my chest as I stare at the child standing by the open supply cabinet. The same small figure I saw on the ridge, still draped in that ghostly white sheet with the dark holes for eyes. Except now, it's standing inside my tower. My hands shake as I grip the knife tighter, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. This can't be happening. How did they get inside? How did they climb the tower so fast? The woman, she's still outside, isn't she? The child tilts its head like it's amused by my fear, and then it starts to laugh. The sound isn't right. It's high-pitched and hollow, echoing off the walls of the tiny room, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I take a step back, my legs shaking so badly I nearly fall over. Before I can think, I lunge forward and grab the sheet, yanking it off in one quick motion. The breath catches in my throat. Standing beneath the sheet is Dan's son, grinning up at me with wide eyes and holding a small walkie-talkie in his hand. What is this? I stammer, trying to make sense of it all. Dan's kid. This was all a joke? The boy's grin only widens. Gotcha, he says, his voice full of laughter. Dad said you'd be scared. For a split second, relief floods through me. My knees feel weak and I almost laugh myself. Of course, it was just a prank, a stupid, elaborate prank set up by Dan and his kid to mess with me. I should have known. But then, something in my gut twists. The woman at the base of the tower. She wasn't part of this. I glance toward the door, my mind racing. Dan, I say into the radio, my voice shaky. You're telling me this whole thing was just a prank? The kid in the sheet? The whole setup? Dan's voice crackles back through the radio, still laughing. Yep, my son and I thought we'd give you a good scare. We even rigged the flashlight to die at just the right time. Pretty good, huh? I feel a surge of anger rise in my chest. Pretty good, you nearly gave me a heart attack. But I hesitate. My mouth goes dry. What about the woman? The line goes silent for a moment. What woman? Dan finally replies, his voice serious now. What are you talking about? I swallow hard. The woman, the one at the bottom of the tower, with yellow eyes, pale, climbing the stairs. That wasn't part of the joke? There's a pause, a long, terrible pause. When Dan speaks again, his voice is low and frightened. That wasn't us. A cold wave of terror washes over me. My pulse pounds in my ears as I turn back to the window. And that's when I see her. She's back, standing at the base of the tower, looking up at me with those wide, vacant eyes, and that same twisted, unnatural grin. Her dark hair clings to her face as blood drips from her clothes, pooling on the steps below. But this time, She doesn't start climbing. She just stands there, staring, waiting. My breath comes in ragged gasps, and I can't tear my eyes away from her. My hand grips the knife so tight it hurts. But I know it won't help. I hear Dan shouting through the radio, but I don't answer. I can't. I'm frozen. And then the woman takes one slow, deliberate step toward the tower. And I know, deep down, I won't survive the night.
My name's Brian Patel, and this happened to me in the National Forest in Oregon. I grew up in Portland and spent most weekends hiking the trails with my dad. After he passed away, I kept the tradition alive, even though the solitude wasn't quite the same. I wasn't the sentimental type, but being out there brought some quiet to my otherwise loud, chaotic life as an electrician. That particular weekend, and I'd planned a 2-day solo trek, something to clear my head and test out some new gear. I wasn't an ultralight fanatic or anything, but I liked keeping things minimal. Just me, the trail, and whatever nature threw at me. My route started at Timberline Lodge and cut through some backcountry trails that didn't see much traffic. It was early morning when I set out, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a map in the other. The first few hours were uneventful. The trails were damp from rain earlier in the week, and the scent of pine mixed with the occasional waft of mushrooms kept things pleasant. Around noon, I passed an older couple hiking with trekking poles. They waved but didn't stop to chat, which was fine by me. Solitude was the point. It was late afternoon when I noticed the first odd thing. I'd stopped at a clearing to refill my water from a nearby creek. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling, nothing. It wasn't unusual for animals to scatter when a human came stomping through, but this was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I joked to myself that maybe I'd finally reached that perfect peace people were always yapping about in self-help books. As I climbed higher into the denser part of the forest, the feeling lingered. Every so often, I'd hear a snapping twig or see a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, but I chalked it up to squirrels or deer. That changed when I reached the ridge. There was a campsite up there, or at least what was left of one. A collapsed tent lay flattened against the dirt, its poles bent at odd angles. Gear was scattered around like someone had emptied a backpack in a panic. What caught my attention was the cooler, one of those sturdy, bear-resistant kinds. Its lid was wrenched open, and deep claw marks gouged the plastic. I didn't recognize the pattern. It didn't look like bear claws. Whatever did it had talons. I poked around cautiously. A jacket with a name tag, Franklin, hung on a low branch, ripped down the middle like someone had tried to peel it off. That's when I saw the blood. Not a lot, but enough to know something had gone wrong. My stomach tightened. I didn't consider myself squeamish, but the combination of the silence and the blood made the air feel heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I didn't linger. I wasn't about to play hero and investigate further, but I also didn't want to turn back the way I'd come. The campsite had a bad vibe, and if someone was injured, I wasn't eager to meet whatever or whoever had caused it. I decided to push forward toward a secondary trailhead about 5 miles out. It wasn't on my original route, but it would get me out of there quicker. The trail narrowed as I descended into a gully. Thick undergrowth swallowed most of the light, and the temperature seemed to drop. My boots squelched in the damp earth as I pushed past ferns that slapped against my legs. About halfway down, I caught a foul odor, like rotting meat mixed with damp fur. My first thought was a dead animal, maybe a cougar kill left to rot, but it was strong enough to make my eyes water. Then I heard it, a low, deep rumbling noise that didn't sound natural. It wasn't a growl, but it wasn't mechanical either. It reverberated through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I chose the third option, freeze. I crouched low, scanning the trees, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps. I forced myself to move, creeping forward as quietly as possible. The trail curved ahead, and just as I rounded the bend, I saw it, or at least part of it. A massive, hulking shape loomed through the trees, crouched over something on the ground. Its limbs were grotesquely long, the joints bending in ways that didn't make sense. It had patches of wiry fur mottled with bare, pale skin. What struck me most was its posture, like a predator that had evolved to ambush. I stayed hidden behind a tree, trying not to breathe. Whatever it was feeding, its movements jerky and almost insect-like. The thing was tearing into something unrecognizable, its talons slicing through flesh with surgical precision. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to retch. The smell was overwhelming. A sudden snap of a branch underfoot betrayed me. The creature's head shot up, swiveling unnaturally as it scanned for the source of the noise. I didn't get a clear view of its face, but I did see its teeth, rows of uneven serrated spikes that looked like they belonged in a shark, not on land. I bolted. Stealth be damned, I sprinted down the trail, branches clawing at my face and arms. The sound of pursuit was immediate, heavy footfalls crashing through the undergrowth. I didn't dare look back. My pack jostled against my shoulders as I weaved through the narrow trail, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. The trail forked ahead, and I veered left without thinking. Bad move. The path led to a dead end, a sheer drop-off into a ravine. My options were limited. Jump and risk breaking something, or turn and face the thing head-on. Neither seemed appealing. I scrambled up a boulder, hoping to gain some height and buy myself time. The creature burst through the trees moments later, its gangly frame silhouetted against the dim light. Up close, it was worse. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones, and its movements were unnervingly smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. It paused, tilting its head as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I fumbled for the small knife in my pocket, knowing it was more symbolic than anything. The creature lunged forward, and I did the only thing I could. I threw my pack at it. The motion startled it, and it recoiled briefly, giving me enough time to leap down the side of the ravine. I tumbled hard, dirt and rocks tearing at my clothes as I slid to the bottom. My ankle twisted painfully, but I managed to scramble to my feet. The creature didn't follow immediately, but I could hear it pacing above, its claws scraping against the rocks as it searched for another way down. I limped through the ravine, following the trickle of water downstream. My only thought was to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The ravine eventually opened up into a clearing, and I spotted a ranger's cabin in the distance. Relief surged through me, though it was tempered by the realization that I wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. The cabin was locked, but I found an axe leaning against the woodpile. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I crouched low, gripping the axe and scanning the tree line. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. When it came, it was sudden. The creature barreled into the clearing, moving faster than seemed possible for its lanky frame. I swung the axe as it charged, catching it in the shoulder. The impact staggered it, but the thing didn't go down. It lashed out with its talons, grazing my arm and drawing blood. We circled each other, predator and prey, roles blurring. I swung again, aiming for its head this time. The blade connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature let out a piercing screech. It collapsed, twitching violently before going still. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork. With my arm bleeding and my ankle screaming in pain, I limped back toward the trailhead, keeping an eye on the shadows. I flagged down the first car I saw, a bewildered couple who probably thought I'd lost my mind. Years later, I avoid Mount Hood. Not because I'm scared, but because I've learned to stick to places where nature follows the rules, or at least pretends to. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana, population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. My days are usually filled with mundane tasks, which suits me just fine. I didn't sign up to be some action hero, but that was before what happened in 2014. That night, everything changed. Chesterville sits on the edge of Lake Vere, a slow-moving body of water surrounded by cypress trees and swampland. People here fish, drink, and go about their lives. It was a pretty uneventful Thursday evening. I was sitting in the patrol car near the lake, enjoying the last of my coffee. That's when the call came through. Domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, near the edge of the bayou. Some old shack out there. Probably a drunk couple having a fight. I sighed, thinking about how cold my coffee was going to get by the time I got back. I could have ignored the call. In a town this small, people mostly resolve their issues on their own. But it's my job, and I'm not the kind of guy to leave a job half done. So I punched the gas and headed toward the edge of the swamp, the smell of rotting vegetation creeping into the car through the vents. The air always smells different out there. Heavy, like something's growing in the darkness. The address was off the main road. Way off. I had to take a gravel path that was barely wide enough for my cruiser, with branches scraping against the sides like they were trying to keep me from going any further. The place was almost hidden behind thick trees, vines practically choking the building itself. It was an old, decaying wooden structure, more of a cabin than a house. When I stepped out of the car, everything felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just on edge because it was so quiet. And in a town where quiet usually means safety, this felt different, like something was waiting. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a scraping noise from inside, something heavy being dragged across the floor. I called out, "Chesterville PD, anyone home?" Still nothing. Now, I've dealt with drunks, domestic fights, and all sorts of noise complaints, but the sound coming from inside wasn't something I'd heard before. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I tried the doorknob. Locked. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, when I noticed something strange, a set of footprints leading around the back. But not human ones. These prints were larger, clawed, like some kind of animal. But whatever made them was walking on two legs, and they were fresh. I was starting to think this wasn't just some domestic dispute. I followed the prints, feeling a chill in the pit of my stomach. As I reached the back of the cabin, I saw the door was ajar, hanging on its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. The cabin was small, just one room, with a dirty mattress on the floor and a table covered in old newspapers. But what caught my eye was the blood. It was smeared across the floor, thick and dark, leading to a corner where something was slumped. I shone the flashlight on it. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body had been torn apart, like he'd been mauled by something much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. His chest was ripped open, ribs exposed, and his face, well, there wasn't much left to recognize. I barely had time to process the scene when I heard that same dragging noise again, but closer this time, coming from behind me. I turned, heart racing, and shone the light toward the sound. Something was moving in the shadows, something big. At first I thought it was a bear, but bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand on two legs. It stepped into the light and I froze. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with matted fur and a face that looked almost human, but twisted, distorted, like something halfway between a person and a wolf. Its claws were long, too long for anything natural, and its mouth was smeared with blood, teeth glistening like knives. I didn't hesitate. I drew my gun and fired, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. But it barely flinched. The bullets hit, sure, but they didn't seem to do much more than piss it off. It let out this low sound, like it was irritated more than hurt, and took a step toward me. I backed up, reloading as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I've never been a great shot, but at this range, it didn't seem to matter. Nothing was going to stop this thing. It lunged. I dove out of the way, crashing into a shelf that sent bottles and cans scattering across the floor. My head was spinning, but I managed to scramble to my feet and run for the door. I don't know how, but I made it back to the car, slamming the door shut just as it slammed into the side of the cruiser, rocking it on its wheels. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I gunned it back down the gravel path. The thing didn't follow me. It just stood there in the rearview mirror, watching. As I sped away, its shape slowly faded into the darkness of the swamp. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to call it in. But what the hell was I gonna say? That some kind of monster tore a man apart and nearly killed me? I thought about it for a long moment, staring at the radio, before deciding to do something I never thought I'd do. I lied. When I called it in, I said I found the man already dead. Looked like some kind of animal attack. Maybe a bear, maybe a wild dog. Hell, maybe both. I didn't mention the thing I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one out there that night. I found out later that 2 fishermen had been on the lake, close enough to the cabin to hear the gunshots. They saw something too. Something large, moving through the trees. They didn't get a good look at it, but they said it wasn't a bear, wasn't anything they'd ever seen before. And they swore it walked on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back out there with the sheriff and a couple of deputies. We found the body, or what was left of it, but there was no sign of the creature, just those same strange tracks leading off into the swamp. The sheriff wrote it up as an animal attack, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something didn't add up. I've thought about that night a lot since then, about how close I came to ending up like that poor bastard in the cabin, and about what's still out there, lurking in the swamp. Some nights, when it's real quiet, I wonder if it's still watching. But I've learned not to go looking for answers. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better to let the mysteries stay buried. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as though the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I had heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps, one that locals said disappeared and reappeared as though it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it and film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera and set it up, filming a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on the damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket, just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in symbols, strange spiraling shapes that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving, the trees closing in tighter. The trail I was following became fainter, more overgrown, and soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping my camera rolling. But after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path, and now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The mist curled around the trees, thick and almost suffocating. But I was certain I'd been on the right trail. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed that I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, standing alone in the fog. "Okay," I muttered. "You've dealt with worse." I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze, listening. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look," I said, pulling out my GPS. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get him some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago was now choked with brambles. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate?" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Eli nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us, the forest." I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around as though he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the whispers growing louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me, the fog so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal. The mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting, somewhere in the mist, for me to return.
I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted: isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store, some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp, a few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old. Things broke. But the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement. Something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still. Too still. The kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved. Just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it. Faint. like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints, long streaks of dust trailing down the windows as if someone or something had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table staring at the window, waiting, but nothing happened. The next morning the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump. Nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong. But everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large. Too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks, long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around. Nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight. A loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted. The fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. My name is Stephen Miller. I'm 51 years old, a retired high school teacher, and a widower. What I'm about to tell you happened just last month during a solo camping trip off Old King Road in Flagler County, Florida. I thought I was looking for peace and quiet, maybe even a little closure. Instead, I found something I still can't explain, something that might still be out there waiting. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The drive down Old King Road was scenic but desolate, with tall oaks draped in Spanish moss and palmettos crowding the edges of the narrow dirt road. My RV, a beaten-up 1994 Winnebago, rattled over every bump, but I was used to it. This wasn't my first trip, but something about the stillness unsettled me. I stopped at a convenience store a few miles before the campsite to grab some firewood and snacks. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, looked up from a magazine as I approached. "Camping out on King Road?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Yeah," I said. "I heard it's quiet out there. Good stargazing." She hesitated. "It's quiet, all right. Just don't wander too far from your RV, and if you hear anything strange, don't go looking for it." I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me as I drove the final stretch to the campsite. The sun was low, and I parked near a pond. The water was dark and still, the air smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. I liked the solitude, at least that's what I told myself. The first sign that something wasn't right came that night. I had a small fire going, and the RV's generator was humming softly. I was sitting by the fire nursing a cup of instant coffee when the generator sputtered and died. The sudden silence was jarring. "Damn thing," I muttered, grabbing a flashlight to check it out. Everything looked fine. No loose wires, no obvious problems. When I flipped the switch, it roared back to life as if nothing had happened. I returned to my chair, but the unease lingered. The forest around me felt too quiet, like the wildlife had been holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Probably a raccoon, I thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. The pond looked serene in the daylight, its surface reflecting the grey sky. As I circled it, I noticed something strange, footprints in the mud. They were large, clawed, and definitely not human. A chill ran down my spine. That's when I saw him, a teenage boy, maybe 15 or 16, standing at the edge of the trees. He was thin, with dirty clothes and wild, unkempt hair. His eyes darted nervously as if he didn't want to be seen. "Hey there," I called out. "Are you lost?" The boy flinched, but he didn't run. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping closer. "Do you live out here?" He shook his head. "It's watching you. It watches everyone. You have to leave before it gets dark." Before I could ask more, he turned and bolted into the woods. I considered going after him, but something in his voice, pure, raw fear, stopped me. I returned to the RV, uneasy. That evening, I found a mutilated deer near the edge of the pond. Its body was torn apart, the flesh twisted and shredded as if by massive claws. I've seen animal attacks before, but this was different. It looked deliberate. I decided to stay inside the RV that night. The generator kept cutting out, leaving me in darkness for minutes at a time. Each time the lights flickered back on, I thought I saw movement outside the windows, shadows darting just out of sight. Around midnight, I heard a sound that froze me in place. My late wife's voice. "Stephen," Dana whispered, "come outside." I knew it wasn't real. I'd been dreaming of Dana ever since she passed, but this was different. Her voice was so clear, so close. When it called again, I almost opened the door before catching myself. "No," I whispered, backing away. "You're not real." The whispers stopped, but the RV shuddered violently as if something heavy had slammed into it. I grabbed a kitchen knife and held it tight, my heart racing. The shuddering stopped, leaving me in silence. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the RV's door, like claw marks. The boy, Ethan, appeared again, standing at a distance. His eyes were wide, his face pale. "It's hungry," he said. "It doesn't stop." "What is it?" I demanded, approaching him. "What's out there?" He hesitated, then muttered, "It's old. It was here before us. It feeds on fear, on grief. If you don't leave, it'll take you." I tried to get him to explain, but he ran off again. This time I followed him. He led me deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the air colder. Finally, we reached a clearing with strange symbols carved into the trunks. Ethan pointed at them. "This keeps it out," he said. "Stay here if you want to live." Before I could ask more, he vanished into the trees. I looked around, my pulse hammering. The forest felt alive, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The whispers started again, louder this time, coming from all directions. I returned to the RV, but the hunger followed. That night, it showed itself. I was sitting by the fire when the forest went silent. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure at the edge of the trees. It was humanoid, but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its eyes glowed yellow, fixed on me. "Dana," it said, its voice distorted and hollow. "Come to me." I stood frozen as it stepped closer. The firelight flickered, and I saw its face, or what was left of it. The flesh was stretched and rotting, its mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid and dashed it onto the fire pit, igniting a massive flame. The creature recoiled, letting out an unearthly shriek. I ran toward the symbols Ethan had shown me, the hunger chasing me through the trees. The moment I crossed the boundary of the symbols, the hunger stopped. It paced back and forth, hissing and snarling, but unable to cross. I stayed there until dawn, clutching the knife and listening to its guttural growls. When the sun rose, the hunger vanished. I returned to the RV, packed up, and drove away without looking back. I stopped at Maggie's store on the way out. She took one look at me and nodded. "You saw it, didn't you?" I nodded, too shaken to speak. "You're lucky," she said. "Most people don't make it out." Later, I tried to find information about Ethan, but no one had seen a boy matching his description in years. Some said he was a ghost, a victim of the hunger long ago. Others claimed he was something else entirely, a guardian of sorts, protecting the living from the forest's darkness. Whatever the truth, I know one thing for certain. The hunger is real, and it's still out there, waiting. My name is Kenneth Warren. I'm 42 years old, and this happened a few months ago when I decided to take a break from the life I'd been barely holding together. My wife Jenna passed away last year, and the silence of my empty home had become unbearable. I'd always loved music. It's what I taught for years. But after she died, I couldn't bring myself to pick up a guitar. So I bought an RV and decided to travel, hoping to find something, anything, that would help me feel alive again. That's how I ended up at Big Shays State Park in Florida. I'd read about the park's rapids, the largest in the state, and thought their roaring, chaotic beauty might inspire me to compose again. What I didn't know was that the silence I'd been running from would find me there, in the voices of the dead. I pulled into the park just before dusk. The forest was dense and quiet, save for the distant roar of the rapids. The ranger station was empty, but I found a map pinned to the bulletin board outside. It marked a few trails and campsites, one of which was near the riverbank. That's where I decided to stay. As I set up my RV, a ranger approached, a woman in her 30s wearing the usual khaki uniform and a wide-brimmed hat. Her name tag read Laura. "Camping alone?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with concern. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just needed some peace and quiet." Laura nodded but hesitated. "The rapids can be unpredictable. Be careful if you hike near the water." She paused, glancing toward the tree line. "Some people say you can hear voices out there at night. Probably just the water playing tricks, but it can be unsettling if you're not used to it." I smiled, more amused than unnerved. "Thanks for the warning." Laura didn't return the smile. "Just don't wander too far." With that, she left, her words hanging in the cool evening air. After dinner, I sat outside the RV with my guitar, strumming idly as the last light faded from the sky. The sound of the rapids was louder now, a constant rush that drowned out the usual nighttime symphony of crickets and frogs. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of inspiration. Maybe this trip wasn't such a bad idea. Then I heard it, a faint giggle like a child's, carried on the wind. I froze, my fingers stilling on the strings. It was faint, almost drowned out by the river, but unmistakable. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. No answer, just the river and the faint rustle of leaves. I told myself it was nothing, just an echo or my imagination playing tricks, and went inside to sleep. That night, I dreamed of Jenna. She was standing by the river, her back to me, humming the lullaby she used to sing when we were younger. I tried to call out to her, but no sound came from my lips. When I woke, my cheeks were wet with tears. The next morning, I decided to hike one of the trails that wound along the river. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden streaks, but the unease from the night before lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About halfway down the trail, I noticed something odd, small footprints in the mud, too small to belong to an adult. They ran alongside my own for a few steps before veering off toward the river. There were no other campers around, and the sight sent a chill down my spine. As I followed the trail, the roar of the rapids grew louder, almost deafening. Then I heard it again, a child's laughter, clear and sharp, cutting through the noise. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called. Again, no answer. Shaking my head, I pressed on, determined to reach the riverbank. When I got there, I found something even stranger, a small, moss-covered doll lying on the rocks. Its face was faded and weathered, but its eyes seemed to glint in the sunlight, almost as if they were watching me. I picked it up, examining it closely. As I turned it over, a faint melody began to play, a music box tune, soft and haunting. My breath caught in my throat. The tune was the same lullaby Jenna used to hum. That evening, I couldn't shake the melody from my head. It felt like the forest was closing in, the shadows growing longer, the air heavier. As I sat in the RV, the music box tune began to play again, faint at first, then louder. I searched the RV, convinced I'd accidentally brought the doll inside, but it wasn't there. The tune stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft knock at the door. I froze. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle and yanked the door open. No one was there, just the empty forest bathed in moonlight. Then I saw them, shadows flitting between the trees. They were small, childlike, moving too quickly to be human. My stomach churned as I realized they were circling the RV. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The RV began to shake as if something, or many somethings, were pounding on the sides. I shouted for them to stop, but the noise only grew louder, the whispers and laughter blending into a chaotic cacophony. Finally, I grabbed my guitar and strummed the first chords that came to mind, playing louder and louder until the shaking stopped. The laughter faded, leaving only the sound of my music and the distant roar of the rapids. The next morning, I knew I had to leave, but something drew me back to the river. I followed the trail again, clutching the doll I'd found. The voices were louder now, calling my name, singing the lullaby in eerie, childlike tones. When I reached the riverbank, the air grew icy and the shadows beneath the trees seemed to ripple like water. "I know you're here," I said, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The voices grew louder and the shadows took shape. 3 children, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark voids. They stared at me, their expressions a mix of sadness and anger. "Help us," they whispered, their voices overlapping in a haunting harmony. "What do you need?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. They pointed to the doll, and in that moment I understood. They were tied to it, bound to the river by whatever tragedy had claimed them. I placed the doll on the ground and stepped back, watching as the children reached for it. But as their hands touched it, their forms began to twist and contort, their whispers turning to wails. The river surged, the rapids crashing violently, and the shadows rushed toward me. I stumbled backward, tripping over the rocks, and ran as fast as I could, the screams echoing in my ears. I left Big Shays that day, vowing never to return. The doll stayed by the river, but the memory of those voices has haunted me ever since. I tried to write about it, to turn it into a piece of music, but every time I play, I hear their whispers in the background. A week after I got home, I found the doll on my porch. Its music box was broken, but sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear it playing. My name is Jason Ellis, and I'm 37 years old. What I'm about to tell you isn't some tall tale for clicks or likes. It's the truth, even if I can't prove it. This happened in the summer of last year, deep in the heart of Hockomock Swamp, Massachusetts, a place some people call the heart of the Bridgewater Triangle. I went in as a skeptic, thinking I'd spend a week documenting my survivalist skills for my blog. I came out broken, both physically and mentally, and I'm still not sure if I escaped at all. It started with an idea I'd had for months: test my skills by surviving 7 days alone in one of the most notoriously haunted places in the country. I didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. I thought the stories were just folklore blown out of proportion. So I packed my gear, tent, GPS, water purifier, knives and my GoPro, and drove to the edge of the swamp. The first thing you notice in Hockomock Swamp is the silence. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just the occasional drip of water and the squelch of mud underfoot. It was oppressive, but I chalked it up to the swamp's natural atmosphere. By late afternoon, I found a clearing to set up camp. As I hammered stakes into the soggy ground, I felt it, the sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder several times, but there was nothing but dense trees and mist. "Get a grip," I muttered, shaking off the unease. That night, I built a small fire and recorded my first blog entry. I talked about the swamp's history, how the Wampanoag people believed it was a place of great spiritual power, and how locals whispered about strange lights and creatures. As I spoke, the words felt heavier than I expected, like they carried a weight I didn't understand. I fell asleep to the crackling of the fire. When I woke up, the fire was out, and something felt off. As I stepped outside the tent, I froze. Bare footprints surrounded my campsite. They were human-like but too large, with long claw-like toes. Maybe a prank, I whispered, though the words felt hollow. Who would trek this far into the swamp just to mess with me? And why wouldn't I have heard them? I brushed it off, deciding to explore further into the swamp. My GPS flickered in and out, forcing me to rely on a map. Around midday, I stumbled upon something bizarre, a crude shrine made of animal bones and sticks perched on a stone slab. The air around it was colder, almost suffocating. I took a few photos and moved on quickly, feeling an inexplicable dread. That night, as I edited footage by the fire, I noticed my knife was missing. I searched the tent, my backpack, nothing. Finally, I found it stuck in a nearby tree, blade first, as though it had been thrown with precision. My stomach churned. I didn't sleep well. On the third day, my water purifier broke. I cursed under my breath, knowing I'd have to boil water from now on, which would cost me precious time and energy. The swamp seemed to mock me, its stillness amplified by my rising frustration. That night, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I lay in my tent, the sounds became distinct, my name spoken softly over and over. Jason! Jason! Help me! It sounded like my ex-girlfriend's voice, fragile and pleading. My rational mind told me it was a trick of isolation, a manifestation of guilt. But when I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the whispers moved, retreating into the darkness. I didn't follow. On the fourth day, I stumbled upon the shrine again, or at least I thought it was the same one. This time, the bones were arranged differently, and symbols were carved into the trees around it. What the hell? I muttered, taking a step back. That's when I saw it. A figure in the distance, crouched low to the ground. It was humanoid but distorted, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. It didn't move, just watched me. I don't remember running back to camp, but I must have. By the fifth day, I was a mess. My gear felt like a hindrance more than a help, and I was down to my last energy bar. The whispers had grown louder at night, and my maps didn't seem to align with the terrain anymore. I was lost. That evening, as I boiled water over a dwindling fire, I heard a branch snap. I turned and saw it, the figure from before, now closer. Its face, it was my face, but wrong, stretched and twisted. "Leave me alone," I shouted, throwing a rock at it. The creature didn't flinch, instead it mimicked my voice. "Leave me alone." I backed into the tent, clutching my knife like a lifeline. Desperation clawed at me. On the sixth day, I tried to retrace my steps to the edge of the swamp, but every path seemed to loop back to the shrine. I felt trapped, like the swamp itself was conspiring against me. That night, the entity grew bolder. It slashed at my tent, tearing through the fabric like paper. I scrambled out, swinging my knife wildly, but the creature danced just out of reach. It was toying with me. On the final day, I decided I had nothing to lose. I gathered dry branches and doused the shrine in lighter fluid. As the flames roared to life, the swamp seemed to shudder. The entity appeared again, screaming. Not a human scream, but a guttural, animalistic roar. It charged at me, its claws slicing across my arm as I stumbled backward. I swung my knife blindly, connecting with something solid. The creature shrieked and disappeared into the shadows. I ran. When I finally emerged from the swamp, I collapsed into the arms of a search and rescue team. I'd missed my check-in by 3 days, and they'd been combing the area. They didn't believe me about the creature. My footage was corrupted, and the photos I'd taken of the shrine were blurred beyond recognition. But sometimes late at night, I hear it, the whisper. My name. The swamp didn't let me go. It just gave me a head start. My name is Robert Gonzalez, and this story is from a year that feels like a lifetime ago. I was born and raised in the small town of Wellesley, Massachusetts. Not much happens here, which is why what I'm about to tell you is even more bizarre. It started innocuously enough. I was fresh out of college, back in my hometown, working a dead-end job at the local hardware store. Not exactly the life I'd envisioned, but hey, it paid the bills. My girlfriend, Lacey, had just moved in with me. We were both trying to save up for something better, but at least we had each other. One evening, my buddy Owen called. "Zachary, you up for a camping trip this weekend?" Just the guys, like old times. Owen always had a knack for pulling me out of my funk. Sure, why not? I replied, figuring a weekend in the woods might clear my head. Friday rolled around and we packed up Owen's beat-up truck with all the essentials: tents, sleeping bags, food, and a decent stash of beer. It was me, Owen, Kyle, and Benny. We headed out to a spot in the Berkshires, a place we'd camped a few times before. It was remote, quiet, and far from the hassles of daily life. We got there just before dusk, set up camp, and lit a fire. The night was filled with laughter and stories. It was like we were kids again, with no responsibilities, no worries. Around midnight, I decided to hit the sack. The others were still up, talking and joking. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, their voices faded into the background, mingling with the sounds of the forest. I woke up to silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I checked my watch. 3 a.m. I sat up and noticed that Owen, Kyle, and Benny were all fast asleep. Stepping out of the tent to stretch my legs and take a leak, I saw the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the campsite. As I stood there, I heard a rustling noise in the trees. Probably a deer or some other animal, I thought. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It was tall, hunched over, and moving with an unsettling grace. My first thought was that it was a bear, but something about its shape was all wrong. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The figure stopped, turned toward me, and then vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I finished up and went back to the tent, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning I told the guys what I'd seen. Owen laughed it off. "Man, you probably had one too many beers. Nothing out here but us and the wildlife." The others agreed, and we went about our day, hiking and exploring the area. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting around the fire again, talking about old times, when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman, but there was something primal about it, something that chilled me to the bone. "What the hell was that?" Kyle asked, his face pale. Benny, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's Bigfoot. Or worse, Kyle's ex-girlfriend." We laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. We decided to check it out, grabbing flashlights and heading in the direction of the scream. The woods were dense, and the beams of our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. After about 10 minutes, we came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. "Oh my God," Benny whispered. "What could have done this?" Kyle asked. "Mountain lion, maybe?" Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We heard another rustle in the trees, and all our flashlights swung toward the sound. The figure was back. Standing at the edge of the clearing, it was taller than I'd realized, easily 7 feet, with long, matted hair and glowing eyes that reflected the light from our flashlights. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted back toward the campsite. The creature let out a low, guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting and wide-eyed. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Agreed," Owen said. "Let's pack up and leave, now." We scrambled to gather our things, tossing them haphazardly into the truck. The forest around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Just as we were about to get in the truck, Benny screamed. We turned to see the creature standing at the edge of the campsite, its eyes locked onto us. Without thinking, I grabbed the hatchet from my pack and hurled it at the creature. It let out a roar and retreated into the woods. "Drive!" I yelled. Owen didn't need to be told twice. We sped down the dirt road, the truck bouncing over the rough terrain. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the windshield. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. Finding a diner that was still open, we stumbled inside, disheveled and shaken. The waitress, an older woman with a kind face, looked at us with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring us coffee. "Something like that," I muttered. We told her a sanitized version of what had happened, just enough to explain why we were so rattled. She listened. nodding occasionally. You know, there are old legends about these woods, she said. Stories of creatures that aren't quite human. Most folks dismiss them as just that, stories. But you never know. We spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, we drove back to Wellesley in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about that night again. Not really. It was like an unspoken pact, a way to keep the fear at bay. Lacey noticed the change in me right away. "Zachary, what happened out there?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a weird trip. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. None of us were. Owen moved to another state a few months later, saying he needed a fresh start. Kyle and Benny drifted away, their laughter and jokes now tinged with an edge of unease. As for me, I stayed in Wellesley, but I never went camping again. I sold my gear, got a new job, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes late at night, I still hear that scream, and I wonder what it was we saw out there in the woods. Life went on, as it does, but the shadows of that night never entirely left me. Years later, Owen called me out of the blue. "Zachary, we need to talk." We met at a bar halfway between our towns. He looked older, more worn. We ordered beers and sat in silence for a while. "I can't stop thinking about it," Owen finally said. "That night, I've tried to move on, but it's always there, like a shadow." "Same here," I admitted. As the years passed, the memory faded but never disappeared, and maybe it never will. I grew old, watching my children grow up and start families of their own. I told them stories about my youth, but I never mentioned that night in the bunkers. Then one evening, my son Max, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit. We sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip you went on years ago? The one you never talk about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, I remember." Max nodded. "I've been doing some research. There are stories about those woods, stories that go back centuries. People talk about seeing things, hearing screams. I think you saw something real, something that shouldn't be there." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of old fears. "Maybe, but there's no point in dwelling on it. We survived, and that's what matters." Max nodded, but I could see the curiosity and determination in his eyes. "I just wanted you to know that I believe you, Dad. Whatever it was, you're not alone." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Maybe the past would never fully let go, but I had my family, and that was enough. Life is full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will. But I've learned to live with the shadows, to find light in the moments that matter. And that's enough for me.